We're going to finish looking at some of these fallacies of evolution. Last time we looked at some scientific problems with evolution, and this time we're going to direct our attention towards some of the biblical problems with evolution. Basically three here that we want to look at. The last one will also be scientific. It's the conclusive one, so we've saved it for the end, but it will also be a biblical argument against the theory of evolution. So we're going to expose some more of these fallacies. And these that we're going to be looking at this time, of course, would just be, or the first two that we're going to be looking at would just be for a Christian, because they're based on the Word of God, and a scientist could either believe the Word or not believe the Word. The things that we covered last time were things not necessarily based on the Scriptures, it's just the facts of the matter. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not, those things are true. So first of all, we're going to cover three things here this evening, and we'll spend most of our time on the third one. First of all, the theory of evolution denies the Bible statement of a finished creation. As I said, this is only for a Christian believer here, because as far as they're concerned, the Bible is just a myth, and it may be true and it may not be true. It may be helpful for your older generation and people with emotional problems, but it's not necessarily trustworthy, though. So first of all, evolution denies the Bible statement of a finished creation. Turn over to Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. So that would be the celestial host and the celestial host and the terrestrial host. Those in the heaven, those upon the earth, and on any other planets, because those planets are part of the heavens. So he says the heavens, the earth, and all the host of them were finished. Now, by the way, verse 1 of chapter 2 comes after verse 22 of the same chapter. Even though you've got it before, as far as it comes in the beginning of chapter 2, and then the creation of Eve comes later. Of course, we know in a time sequence the creation of Eve now came before this first verse in chapter 2. But he says anyway, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So there God is saying, this is a finished creation. It's not one that's in the process of evolution and growing larger or growing smarter or growing better, but it's finished. Hebrews 4, verses 3 and 4. So these are just the passages you need to know as a Christian that tell you that there's no such thing as evolution, because these texts deny that. Evolution denies the Bible statement of a finished creation. Hebrews 4, 3 and 4, for we which have believed do enter into rest. As he said, I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. Especially the end of verse 3 here in Hebrews 4. Although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. By the way, this would hurt, I'll just say it'll hurt Mr. Cap's theory on his foundation word, meaning the destruction of the world. Here he says the works are finished at the destruction of the world. But he's got to go on and recreate everything. You see, he didn't run all the text there. He just found a couple that were helpful to him. You remember what we taught you there on the foundation of the world? According to him, of course, there could have been no recreation, because here it says the works were finished right there in the gap theory whenever the world was destroyed. So there's a good verse against that. And he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise, and God did rest the seventh day from all his work. Again, the biblical doctrine of a finished creation. Then Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 9. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. Now, evolution says we've got these new species arriving all the time. The thing that hath been is that which shall be. In other words, the past is here in the present, and the present is a reflection of the past, and there's no new thing under the sun. And we could find many other passages that would teach the same thing. Second problem, scriptural problem with evolution, is that it denies the Bible's teaching on fixed kinds. We see 10 times in chapter 1 of Genesis the phrase, after his kind. I want to show those to you back over in Genesis chapter 1. The Bible, in other words, makes it very clear that like begets like. And he is very repetitive in saying 10 times that like begets like. Like produces after its own kind. And we see this 10 times here just in Genesis chapter 1. See, evolution doesn't teach this particular thing here. It doesn't teach a boundaries of fixed kinds. Obviously, it couldn't teach a boundary of fixed kinds because we've always got things hopping over any alleged boundary and changing from some type of reptile to a mammal. Verse 11, and God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seeds, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. It says the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. In other words, an apple tree is going to have apples, and in those apples are going to be seeds that when you plant them, they're going to produce another apple tree, and it's going to grow apples, and it's going to have seeds after his kind, again and again and again. You plant those seeds, and you'll still come up with an apple tree, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. 3 times now. And God saw that it was good. Verse 21. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. 4th time. And every winged fowl after his kind. 5th time. And God saw that it was good. Verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, especially verses 24 and 25, if you just go back and look at those times where it says, and after his kind. It's trying to get across the point here. There's no crossover from one species to another species. You're going to always end up with after his kind. Over in the New Testament, we see several passages that teach this, such as in Matthew chapter 7. You see, there can be very large divisions. You've got Siberian tigers. You've got huge African lions, bobcats. You've got Persian and Siamese cats. But guess what they all are, though? They're still a cat. Now, there's a lot about a lion or a Siberian tiger that's different than your pet cat that you keep at home. But there's also a lot that's very similar. And even though one is large, one is small, it's still in that family that's still a cat. Now, that's just a broad, general cat there. Obviously, you're not going to have a Siamese that gives birth to a Siberian tiger. That's just a large grouping, a large family there, but it's still all a cat. But you won't ever have a dog come out of that group, though. You're always going to have some type of cat, something in the cat family that stays there. So you can have a large variety here, but they're all going to be in the same or similar family. Matthew 7, beginning with verse 15. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? He gives us, Jesus himself gives us his own statement against evolution. You've got to stay within your fixed kind. You've never picked grapes off of a bush that had thorns on it, or picked figs off of a tree that had thistles on it. They just don't match. They don't go together. Even though they're all a tree or a vine, they still don't go together. James 3:11 and 12. Doth a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. And they're telling us that one amoeba can yield both man and animal. And the Bible says no. By analogy here, it says no. I mean, it happens to go on in the next verse and ask the question, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Evidently, they're not. Because if you are, you'd believe verses 11 and 12, especially verse 12. He said, my brethren, can the fig tree bear olives, or a vine figs? 1 Corinthians 15:39 is another passage. It's the best of all passages against evolution. If you want to know the best one, it's 1 Corinthians 15:39. There was even a theory back 40 years ago, back in the 40s, known as the monster theory, that a reptile laid an egg and a bird hatched out of the thing. And that actually was a theory that was more or less acceptable in certain circles just 40 years ago, before they progressed a little bit beyond that. You know, they've got to get what they're always going to try to do is get the mutations in there. I was reading in a biology textbook today, just studying on that, back to the very first chapter there in this biology textbook, and they want to start off there with the origin of life. And I knew what they were going to start with, and it's mutations. Now, they don't tell you where the very, very first thing came from. They can't tell you where that came from. But how did we get from that thing that they say was the first thing back there? Well, it's by means of mutation. But remember, I told you, mutations are always harmful. They always do harm to you. They never begin to produce something better and better. They always do something wrong, something bad. That theory was eventually given up, the monster theory. But that more or less is still what people believe today. It's just that they're not going to say that something like that immediate happened, that a reptile actually laid an egg and then a bird, pecked its way out of it. That's too immediate. We need more time to go to a different type of reptile and begin slowly to get wings and feathers on him. They're not going to do something that immediate anymore. But they still believe the same thing. That's what it all boils down to. Verse 39, all flesh is not the same flesh. There is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. Just amazing how the Bible always covers everything before it was even invented. It's always got it covered there. God's not going to let any false doctrine or false heresy come on the scene that he doesn't already have covered somewhere here in his Word. Because, if he did, then what would we believe as a Christian? We wouldn't have anything to base our belief upon. We'd have to go back to scientific facts, quote unquote, scientific theories, quote unquote. We'd have to base our belief on something, on hearsay or something. So he's going to always have it covered here so we know that as a Christian, what should we believe about these things? And Paul's not even teaching on evolution. He's teaching on, of course, the resurrection here in 1 Corinthians 15, covering that great doctrine of the Christian resurrection or of universal resurrection. He's talking about Christians going into glory here, but he's able to cover in there that the flesh of man and beast and birds and fish is not the same type of flesh. In other words, it didn't originate from the same source. Questions? It surely would be. See, like George Mendel, of course, is the one that's the father of genetics. George Mendel is famous for getting his different types of peas. But you can't cross peas and end up with a sack of potatoes, though. You can see this is the thing that they try to point to. It's good that you brought that up, because they want to show how they can, end up with a donkey. They want to show how they can end up with a certain type of pea that's got a different color, that's a different flavor. And there are just hundreds of varieties of just peas. Or you can take anything like that, hundreds of varieties. And they're wanting to show, now see, we were able to cross these kinds and end up with something different. A million years later, maybe it's going to cross again with some corn and end up with a carrot or something. Thing is, that never has happened, though. That's why we have to allow, as a Christian, a broad range here for changes to take place. Of course, it's not Christian to fool with genetics and try to end up with something that God didn't try to make here in the first place. If he'd wanted that pea, he would have made that pea. So we as a Christian give them that much room, that there is that broad range, but the thing I always hold them down to is just that simple thing that you don't cross peas and end up with, something strange, like a maple tree. You're going to stay with that little pea there. And you can make it grow real big. Maybe it weighs 15 pounds. You can cross enough and you can grow peas until they weigh 15 pounds. Still a pea, though. And it can have rainbow colors and swirls all over it and grow horns on it. But it's still a pea, though. Won't change any from that pea. It's just going to stay a pea. Now, let me just show you a diagram here. Let me explain a little bit before we get there. Your question here on things producing after their kind, why is it that everything produces after its kind? Some of you already know, deoxyribonucleic acid. That is why everything produces after its kind, or you can say DNA for short. Deoxyribonucleic acid. This is why everything produces after its kind, because these strands of deoxyribonucleic acid, which are in the chromosomes, which are on the genes that hold the genes together, and your genes, of course, come from your parent, determine all of your hereditary characteristics. And that substance there, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is going to say at the moment of conception there at the very beginning, doesn't matter what type of plant or what type of animal, mammal, fish, bird we're talking about, it's going to already have a pre-coded system of information there to tell you what that's going to be whenever it develops. And just to show you that, I want to show you the simplest thing that we could look at, and yet it's one of the most highly sophisticated and complex things that we could look at, and that is a human cell. Now, in your body, you have a million cells. That's how many of these things right here you have in your human body, in the average human body. You've got a million cells. This is what your whole body is made up of. If you could take all those out and divide them each from one another and lay them out, that would be you there. I mean, you would no longer be standing on two legs. That would be you laying there, a million cells. So you put all those together and you end up with a human being. So you can see that is a very, very simple thing. It's not like the brain as a whole, because the brain is made up of millions of cells. When you keep breaking this down, the brain, or whatever you want to think is something remarkable, the human heart, you end up with millions and millions of these little things right here. Now that's the simplest thing that you could end up with here in the human body, but I want you to see just how complex this thing really is. Now this is the one cell, just one cell in a human body. I'm going to move this up so you can copy it down if you want to as we go along and look at this. Because you need to understand this so you can share with someone just how complex that one simple cell is. I mean, it's just amazing how complex it is, even though it's the smallest thing in your body. Now, the cell is composed of three different things. First of all, we have the nucleus. This is this round object here in the center of the cell. The nucleus, this is the center of all cell activity. It's the brain control. It's the information center for all of the activity in this one little cell here. And within this nucleus, we have contained two other things. The nucleolus and your chromosomes. The nucleolus and your chromosomes. The nucleolus contains RNA, ribonucleic acid. It's something rather new that we really don't know what it's all about or what it's for. Scientists really don't know what it's for. This is contained in the nucleus, RNA, ribonucleic acid. Then in your chromosomes, this is what we were just talking about earlier, your chromosomes contain your deoxyribonucleic acid because within your nucleus here are the genes. This is where the gene is located, along with your strands of DNA. And DNA has a pre-coded system of information to tell you what all of your characteristics will be once you're developed. See, there's no way you get evolution. This thing it's just like a computer that you program into it. DNA has programmed into it, just like a computer, what you're going to be like whenever you grow up, what you're going to look like whenever you grow up. You see, whenever your mother and your father united in the act of marriage and you were conceived in the womb, then, or not really conceived in the womb, that's just a general statement. Of course, conception takes place in the fallopian tube. Once the egg has been released from the ovary, it goes into one of the two fallopian tubes. Once the egg becomes fertilized, then the ovum goes on down to the uterine wall, and it's, of course, implanted in the uterus, and there the child begins to grow by the process known as mitosis. But once they came together, you are conceived there as a microscopic speck. Then within that microscopic speck is the substance DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and it has all of this pre-coded information. Are you going to be tall or short? What color hair are you going to have? I mean, are you going to be a bird or are you going to be a human? I mean, it has those simple things there. And this is why we can trace all of these inherited characteristics back to our parents. We can't trace them to some other species because like always begets like, and it's always because of this substance known as DNA. Now, the Bible doesn't have to tell us anything about DNA. It just says everything produces after its kind. Scientists are the ones who have gone in here and discovered these things and then put a name to them and found out, well, that's true. And that's true with everyone in here. Like always is going to produce like. I mean, we would have to raise the question, doesn't matter what species you're talking about, let's say a pair of birds that mate, how does that fertilized egg in the female know that it's supposed to end up with birds? How does it know that? Or in the human, how does that egg know that I'm supposed to end up as a human being? Now, you can't just say all this happens by chance. It has to be a pre-coded, infallible system that works here. If it happens by chance, then we've got evolution on our hands all over again. But if it infallibly works, it may produce a human with no arms and no legs. Of course, we know that's because of the fall, but it's still a human, though. And it's because of what's contained here in your chromosome. So this is the first thing that this highly sophisticated and complex human cell contains. Even though it's so small, million of them in your body, it's remarkable how complex it is. The second thing it contains is known as cytoplasm. All of this red stuff that we have colored in here is cytoplasm. That's what this is pointing to here. All of this red stuff in here is cytoplasm. And it is a watery substance that is the room that holds all these other little items in here. Even your nucleus is held here in this cytoplasm. Otherwise, you see you've got all of this encircled here by a cell membrane that keeps one cell going into another cell. But how do you keep these different parts inside each individual cell apart? Well, they are kept apart by all of this red stuff here known as cytoplasm. And then the third thing that we have in the cell that I just mentioned that is contained here in the cytoplasm is known as the organelles. O-R-G-A-N-E-L-L-E-S. O-R-G-A-N-E-L-L-E-S. Organelles. And all of these individual items in here, such as your plastids, your lysosome, your endoplasmic reticulum, all of these things are known as organelles here. So these are the three basic things. First of all, your nucleus. Secondly, all of your cytoplasm. Then thirdly, all of your organelles that are found in here. Do you have a question before I go on? Intelligence is partly inherited and it's partly learned. That's a debate that's gone on for years and years, and I'm real familiar with, being from the School of Education. We always had debates on, was intelligence acquired? And it's difficult to prove, well, you can't prove that either it is all acquired from your parents or it is all learned. And the most reasonable thing that appears to people is that part of it's acquired and part of it's learned. Because you can have someone that's acquired just a great intelligence, and if they don't apply that intelligence, they'll never go anywhere with that. You can have people that are born with not so much intelligence, but if they apply themselves, they just can get smarter. Even to the, not just of knowing things, anyone can know things, but they can get to the place where they can retain things better. So their intellect increases. So you're not left out if you weren't born with any intellect. Just apply yourself. But see, if you were born with a lot of intellect and then you apply yourself, that's where you end up with your geniuses. So you'll never find a genius that wasn't born with a very big intellect and got up there. If you're a genius, you're always born with an acquired, hereditary, brilliant intellect, but then, of course, you're going to apply yourself. And that's where you end up with your 8-year-old child prodigies that can run up and down that piano board like you've never seen before. Now, a lot of that's acquired, born in him. And of course, you've got genes, some that are dominant and some that are recessive. You can have genes that have been passed down for generations, recessive, never show up until, of course, you have to end up with 2 recessive genes together to ever get that product in a person. As long as you've got one dominant, one recessive, you'll always end up with that dominant characteristic, such as hair color in here. Look around here, and what's the majority of people in here? Are they dark-headed or light-headed? Always dark-headed. Any building you ever go in, the majority of people are dark-headed because dark hair is a dominant gene and blonde hair is a recessive gene. And the only way you'll ever get blonde hair is to get a recessive gene of blonde from your father and a recessive gene of blonde from your mother. That's the only way you'll ever end up with blonde hair. Because if you get one recessive gene for blonde from one parent and one dominant gene of dark hair from another, you'll always end up dark hair. And obviously, if you get 2 dominant genes for dark hair, you'll end up with dark hair. So you with blonde hair, you know how you got it. You got one gene from your father that was a recessive and that was blonde. You got one gene from your mother that was recessive and that was blonde. You end up with blonde hair. All your characteristics, short and tall, the color of your eyes, you've got dominant and recessive genes. Do you have a question, brother? Or I lost you on that spell. I didn't hear what you said there. Something about wisdom? No, he didn't receive any type of wisdom, no. No, he didn't receive any type of wisdom, any type of destructive wisdom. Wisdom is something that you acquire. That's different than intellect. Wisdom is something that, of course, is acquired. Well, see, Eve, of course, 2 Corinthians 11 tells us, was deceived. She had perfect intellect, but you can have a perfect moral character, which both of them had at that time, but unless your character is proven, then it'll never grow to maturity. And that, of course, is what the Christian life is all about, is acquiring character through trials. She was deceived, and of course Adam disobeyed with his eyes wide open. Okay, let's see where we were back here. Do you have a question? too. No, that's ribosomes. Ribosomes are the little guides, the little hairy things on the endoplasmic reticulum. The nucleolus, what did it do? We don't know what it does. The RNA in it, we don't know. It appears to have something to do with hereditary characteristics like DNA. DNA, of course, is the primary thing. I mean, I'm telling you that we don't know because there are a lot of different things, but it's never been proven one way or another. Well, let's go on and look at some of these other things here that are so fascinating. Your vacuole, that's a large bubbly mass here filled with air and partly digested fluids. And it acts as more or less one of the storage capacities here within the cell because it contains partly digested fluids in your vacuole. I'm going to take this up a little bit more to make sure those in the back can see down low here. We've already discussed the cytoplasm. The next thing we come to are these two little objects known as plastids. Now, there are two types of plastids. One type of plastids evidently contains pigment, which results partly in your color. It's one of the things that color comes from, is the pigment that's found in certain types of plastids in your cells. Another type of plastid is known as your leucoplast, and your leucoplasts act as food storage depots. This is another one of the things that is operative in the realm of storing food storage depots. Depots, food storage, leucoplast. How do you spell leucoplast? Leucoplasts. Leu, leucoplast. As in leukemia. Leukemia and leucoplast, though, don't have anything to do with each other, though. Leukemia has to do with the blood, your blood cells. Leucoplasts, I guess every one of us here, every single week, eat leucoplasts, a certain type of leucoplast. You know what it is? Every one of us do. We eat a lot of them. We eat a lot of leucoplasts. No. The food storage depot. Potato. A potato is nothing but a big leucoplast. It is the food storage depot for the potato plant. It's comparable to the little plastids that are found in your cell there. That's what a potato is. It's a leucoplast. So if you dig up your potatoes and eat them, you can say, we're having leucoplasts for dinner tonight. They'll wonder what you're talking about then. They may not show up for dinner, though. They know you're going to have leucoplasts. Those are plastids, though. Then we come down here to our lysosome. By the way, the nucleus was discovered back in 1833. See, all of this is relatively modern here, and your lysosome was just discovered in 1952. Now, I'm not going to trust people that are just beginning to discover things about the human body and then they're going to tell me how I evolved. They just discovered this thing 30 years ago. And, of course, they would be the first ones to admit, if they'd be honest, that we don't know anything about the human body. Oh, what they know is a lot, but compared to what they don't know anything about the human body. And if they'd be honest, they would admit that. The same is true with the universe out there. They think they can tell how we got here and how this planet got here, and they know nothing about our universe. What they know is so infinitesimally small about our universe, and they can look way away, with these big telescopes they have, like Wilson's Observatory in Mount Palomar. They can look into other galaxies. Some of us who have telescopes can look into other galaxies. But that doesn't really help us any better. I had to put that in there. I was up in my observatory the other night looking into another galaxy with that telescope. But just because I can see that other galaxy, how many trillions of them are on the other side of that one, though? That we'll never see. Unless that old denominational thing is true, that we're going to get to float on clouds. Maybe we'll float over there into another one. What is your lysosome? Well, it's one of the most interesting things in the cell. It's known as the suicidal agent of the cell. The suicidal agent of the cell. Now, do you know what? Within these, you've got cell membrane walls that encircle your lysosomes, and you've got, of course, thousands of enzymes that make up your lysosome that are found in here. Now, if that cell wall ever breaks down and those enzymes come out of your lysosome, it'll destroy your body. Now, this is something that they just discovered in 1952, and they're fascinated at that because why is a cell going to produce within itself the very thing that can kill it? Well, what happens to your cells? They're killing each other, dying all the time, and you're having new ones produced all the time. Not always done by your lysosomes, but they're fascinated by that. Why is a cell going to produce the very thing that can kill it if that wall ever breaks down there? You see, if this wall here, all of this is cytoplasm here, and if this wall breaks down and those enzymes are loose from here, they'll go up here to that nucleus and destroy it. And that'll destroy that cell. And of course, if it could get through out of the cell membrane and through the next cell membrane into the next one, they would go destroy that cell. It'd have a million to go. It might take a while to reach them, but all it would have to go, now I'm speaking, I don't know how I'm speaking here, but all it would have to do is go and let loose some other lysosome enzymes, and they could take off and destroy a person's body. So it's a suicidal agent, it's what they generally call it. Then we come down here to your mitochondria. You ought to remember some of these things from high school, at least the names. Mitochondria, what's that? That's the powerhouse of the cell. That's where the cell derives 90% of its energy from the mitochondria. It's got a name that goes along with its function, mitochondria. Discovered in 1890, I believe. So this is where the cell gets its energy. Then we go up here to our endoplasmic reticulum. Now you've got some here, all these things, these long strands here. These strands up here are also endoplasmic reticulum. And they act as canals to carry synthesized protein from one part of the cell to another part. And they also act, just like your vacuole, as a food storage place and as certain types of plastics, as a food storage place. It stores proteins that have been manufactured in your endoplasmic reticulum. And of course, you can see with these long canals here, it just has a few of them drawn here. They stretch far enough over the cell to be able to carry synthesized proteins to other parts of the cell. That leaves us with ribosomes, which sometimes, or most of the time, I guess I should say, are found on the endoplasmic reticulum. Sometimes they can be found together, just in a big group of ribosomes all together. And they contain RNA. They are just like the nucleolus. Both of these things are the two things that contain your RNA, and they help in the production of proteins, ribosomes. Now, how in the world are we going to get something like that, even though that's the simplest thing in our body to evolve? To have a mitochondria in it, and an endoplasmic reticulum in it, and lysosomes, and ribosomes, and a nucleus, and nucleolus. How are we going to end up with something like that? I mean, the chances are, you just wouldn't ever want to bet on that, because the odds would be too bad against you. I brought one chart here and gave you, I forget what it was, 110 to the 200 and something power, 221st, 321st. But as I said then, how do we not know it's the 322nd power? I mean, that's just to impress you there with all those zeros. There's no way, there's no chance. So you couldn't say, well, 10 to something power. There's no chance for it ever to do that. Someone's figured out before what the chances are for a chimpanzee to peck all the right keys on a typewriter and be able to peck all of A, B, C, D, go right on through the alphabet. A chimpanzee, just on random. You know, if he sat down there and you'd train him to peck, I guess he'd start pecking on the thing. But what are the chances he'd hit the A, B, C and go straight through it? Practically nil. Practically none that he'd ever do that. As smart as a chimpanzee is. I didn't bring that figure. I've seen that figure around. What his chances are of ever hitting those things and ending up with that whole alphabet. Even though he's a smart little creature, that's something that's just not going to take place. Look over in 1 Corinthians 14. I like verses 33 and 40 as far as deoxyribonucleic acid is concerned and inherited characteristics. Why is it that the DNA in a human is always going to produce a human and never get confused and mixed up and produce something else? Well, of course, he's not talking about that here, but he says in verse 33, God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the assemblies of the saints. Now, see, you've got confusion on your hands there, if you're ending up with dozens of different species. Verse 40, let all things be done decently and in order. Decently and in order. And you just got wild, random chaos out there in the evolutionary field. Just perchance, things evolving. I guess maybe you could compare the belief in evolution to some charismatic services. Because that's what he's writing here. Let all things be done decently and in order. Some of us were at a service where they didn't do things decently or in order. A good scripture right there for that. And this is talking about the gifts and what you should do whenever you gather together. And what does he say? Let all things be done decently and in order. No, they were some of the most indecent people I'd ever seen there. And the most out of order. Praise the Lord. I guess there is a comparison there. A cryptic one, but there's one there. Then we come to a third and our final reason tonight. First of all, we said evolution denies the Bible statement of a finished creation. Secondly, evolution denies the Bible's teaching on fixed kinds. Thirdly, the evolution of the so-called scientists contradicts two of the most basic laws of science, known as the laws of thermodynamics. And this is where, if you're a so-called Christian scientist or a creation advocate, and this is the point you always want to push at the atheistic scientists, that their belief in evolution contradicts their belief in something else that they believe in very strongly. That happens to be the two laws of thermodynamics. Let me tell you what thermodynamics means. Thermodynamics comes from two Greek words. What do you think the words mean by looking at it there? We get a lot of our words from Greek and from Latin. Thermo, heat. Dynamics, energy. Acts 1 and verse 8, but ye shall receive dunamis, power. After that, the Holy Ghost has come upon you. Same word over there in the Greek as in the Latin, dunamis. We get our word dynamite from that word that means power, because you've got a lot of power behind dynamite. So thermodynamics is the science that deals with the power or energy that is contained in heat and its conversion to other forms. Thermodynamics, from two Greek words which mean heat and power, heat and energy. And it's the subject or the science, the discipline of science that deals with the power or energy contained in heat and in its conversion to other forms. This is the principle behind the steam engine and behind the steamboat. They realized that if you had heat, that heat, although it is a form of energy, heat itself will produce other energy. And they've got wheels to turn simply by means of steam. Steam is heat. That's on the basis of the laws of thermodynamics, or on the basis of the definition of thermodynamics. Now, what is work? I'll have to define several more things before we can go into this. What is work or energy? Well, we're going to just classing these two together. You could make a distinction between work and energy, but work and energy are a measurement of foot-pounds. What is a foot-pound? This is what work is. You say, I did 8 hours work today. You probably don't know what you said. Because work or energy is a measure of foot-pounds. What's a foot-pound? It's the amount of energy needed to move 1 pound, 1 foot. That's what a foot-pound is. That's what work is measured in, foot-pound. You might have never heard of a foot-pound before, but you have heard of horsepower. What is horsepower? See, that's a measurement of energy or work there. It's not horses pulling something either. I mean, that's the name of it, horsepower. If you've got a little lawnmower that has a 3-horsepower motor to it, or a go-kart that has a 5-horsepower motor to it, what does that mean? Well, horsepower is measured in foot-pounds, but it's measured in a time unit. And that time unit is the second unit. You could have a second or a minute or an hour or whatever. But horsepower is a foot-pound that's measured in a time unit, and that time unit is the second unit. So 1 horsepower equals 550 foot-pounds per second. You see, that's a lot right there. 1 horsepower equals 550 foot-pounds per second. That's how much energy or work you've got there at your command when you've got 1 horsepower. And what does that mean? If 1 horsepower is 550 foot-pounds per second, it means that you can move 550 pounds, you can move it 1 foot, and you can do it in 1 second. You see, a foot-pound doesn't have a time designation to it. It doesn't say how long it takes you to move that 1 pound, 1 foot. But a horsepower does tell you how long it takes you to move 550 pounds, 1 foot. You've got to be able to do it in 1 second. When you can do it that fast, you've got a horsepower on your hands. So when you end up with, a car that's got hundreds of horsepower in it, that's what it'll do. That's what it can move. That's the potential of it there. Of course, it's hard to utilize. That's the thing about work and energy. It's hard to get the full utilization out of it because you're always losing things in non-recoverable heat. That happens with everything that moves. You're losing energy in non-recoverable heat that you can't gain back and that you can't put to work for you anymore.
For the continued